President of the United States in Warsaw.
Hello, Poland. One of our great allies. President Duda, Prime Minister, Mr. Mayor, to all the former ministers and presidents, as well as mayors and Polish political leaders from all across the country. Thank you for welcoming back to Poland. You know, it was nearly 1 year ago. I spoke at the Royal Castle here in Warsaw, just weeks after Vladimir Putin had unleashed his murderous assault on Ukraine, the largest land war in Europe since World War II had begun. And the principles that have been the cornerstone of peace, prosperity, and stability on this planet for more than 75 years were at risk of being shattered. 1 year ago, the world was bracing for the fall of Kyiv. Well, I just come from a visit to Kyiv, and I can report Kyiv stands strong. Kyiv stands proud. It stands tall. And most important, it stands free. When Russia invaded, it wasn't just Ukraine being tested. The whole world faced a test for the ages. Europe was being tested. America was being tested. NATO was being tested. All democracies were being tested. And the questions we faced were as simple as they were profound. Would we respond? Or would we look the other way? Would we be strong? Or would we be weak? Would all of our allies, would be united or divided? 1 year later, we know the answer. We did respond. We would be strong. We would be united. And the world would not look the other way. We also face fundamental questions about the commitment to the most basic of principles. Would we stand up for the sovereignty of nations? Would we stand up for the right of people to live free from naked aggression? Would we stand up for democracy? 1 year later, we know the answers. Yes, we would stand up for sovereignty, and we did. Yes, we would stand up for the right of people to live free from aggression, and we did. And we would stand up for democracy, and we did. And yesterday, I had the honor to stand with President Zelensky in Kyiv to declare that we will keep standing up for these same things, no matter what. When President Putin ordered his tanks to roll into Ukraine, he thought we would roll over. He was wrong. The Ukrainian people are too brave. America, Europe, a coalition of nations from the Atlantic to the Pacific, we were too unified. Democracy was too strong. Instead of an easy victory he perceived and predicted, Putin left with burnout tanks and Russia's forces in disarray. He thought he'd get the Finlandization of NATO. Instead, he got the NATOization of Finland and Sweden. He thought NATO would fracture and divide. Instead, NATO is more united and more unified than ever before. He thought he could weaponize energy to crack your resolve, Europe's resolve. Instead, we're working together to end Europe's dependence on Russian fossil fuels. He thought autocrats like himself were tough and leaders of democracy were soft. And then he met the iron will of America and the nations everywhere that refused to accept the world governed by fear and force. He found himself at war with a nation led by a man whose courage would be forged in fire and steel, President Zelensky. President Putin is confronted with something today that he didn't think was possible a year ago. The democracies of the world have grown stronger, not weaker. But the autocrats of the world have grown weaker, not stronger. Because in the moments of great upheaval and uncertainty, that knowing what you stand for is most important. And knowing who stands with you makes all the difference. The people of Poland know that, you know that. In fact, you know it better than anyone here in Poland. Because that's what solidarity means. Through partition and oppression, when the beautiful city was destroyed after the Warsaw Uprising, during decades under the iron fist of communist rule, Poland endured because you stood together. That's how brave leaders of the opposition and the people of Belarus continue to fight for their democracy. That's how the resolve of Moldovan people, the resolve of the people of Moldova to live in freedom, gained them independence and put them on the path to EU membership. President Sandu is here today. I'm not sure she is, but I'm proud to stand with you and the freedom-loving people of Moldova. Give her a round of applause. 1 year into this war, Putin no longer doubts the strength of our coalition, but he still doubts our conviction. He doubts our staying power. He doubts our continued support for Ukraine. He doubts whether NATO can remain unified. But there should be no doubt. Our support for Ukraine will not waver. NATO will not be divided, and we will not tire. President Putin's craven lust for land and power will fail, and the Ukrainian people's love for their country will prevail. Democracies of the world will stand guard over freedom today, tomorrow, and forever. So that's what's at stake here. Freedom. That's the message I carried to Kyiv yesterday, directly to the people of Ukraine. When President Zelensky said he came to the United States in December, quote, he said, this struggle will define the world and what our children and grandchildren, how they live, and then their children and grandchildren. He wasn't only speaking about the children and grandchildren of Ukraine. He was speaking about all of our children and grandchildren, yours and mine. We're seeing again today what the people of Poland and the people across Europe saw for decades. Appetites of the autocrat cannot be appeased. They must be opposed. Autocrats only understand one word: no, no, no. No, you will not take my country. No, you will not take my freedom. No, you will not take my future. And I'll repeat tonight what I said last year in this same place. A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never be able to ease the people's love of liberty. Brutality will never grind down the will of the free. And Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. Never. For free people refuse to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. You know, this has been an extraordinary year in every sense. Extraordinary brutality from Russian forces and mercenaries. They've committed depravities, crimes against humanity, without shame or compunction. They've targeted civilians with death and destruction, used rape as a weapon of war, stolen Ukrainian children in an attempt to steal Ukraine's future, bombed train stations, maternity hospitals, schools, and orphanages. No one can turn away their eyes from the atrocities Russia is committing against the Ukrainian people. It's abhorrent. It's abhorrent. But extraordinarily, as well, has been the response of the Ukrainian people and the world. 1 year after the bombs began to fall, Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine. Ukraine is still independent and free. From Kherson to Kharkiv, Ukrainian fighters have reclaimed their land. more than 50% of the territory Russia held last year. The blue and the yellow flag of Ukraine proudly waves once again. President Zelensky still leads a democratically elected government that represents the will of the Ukrainian people. The world has already voted multiple times, including the United Nations General Assembly, to condemn Russia's aggression and support a just peace. Each time in the UN, that vote has been overwhelming. In October, 143 nations of the United Nations condemned Russia's illegal annexation. Only four in the entire UN voted with Russia. 4. So tonight, I speak once more to the people of Russia. The United States and the nations of Europe do not seek to control or destroy Russia. The West was not plotting to attack Russia, as Putin said today. And millions of Russian citizens who only want to live in peace with their neighbors are not the enemy. This war is never a necessity. It's a tragedy. President Putin chose this war. Every day the war continues is his choice. He could end the war with a word. It's simple. If Russia stopped invading Ukraine, it would end the war. If Ukraine stopped defending itself against Russia, it would be the end of Ukraine. That's why together we're making sure Ukraine can defend itself. The United States has assembled a worldwide coalition of more than 50 nations to get critical weapons and supplies to the brave Ukrainian fighters on the front lines. Air defense systems, artillery, ammunition, tanks, armored vehicles. The European Union and its member states have stepped up with unprecedented commitment to Ukraine. Not just in security assistance, but economic and humanitarian refugee assistance and so much more. To all of you here tonight, take a moment, and I'm serious when I say this. Turn around and look at one another. Look at what you've done so far. Poland is hosting more than 1.5 million refugees from this war. God bless you. Poland's generosity, your willingness to open your hearts and your home is extraordinary. The American people are united in our resolve as well. All across my country, in big cities and small towns, Ukrainian flags fly from American homes. Over the past year, Democrats and Republicans in our United States Congress have come together to stand for freedom. That's who Americans are, and that's what Americans do. The world is also coming together to address the global fallout from President Putin's war. Putin tried to starve the world, blocking the ports in the Black Sea to stop Ukraine from exporting its grain, exacerbating the global food crisis that hit developing nations in Africa especially hard. Instead, the United States and the G7 and partners around the world answered the call with historic commitments to address the crisis and to bolster global food supplies. And this week, my wife, Jill Biden, is traveling to Africa to help bring attention to this critical issue. Our commitment is to the people of Ukraine and the future of Ukraine. A Ukraine that's free, sovereign, and democratic. That was the dream of those who declared Ukraine's independence more than 30 years ago, who led the Orange Revolution and the Revolution of Dignity, who braved ice and fire in the Maidan, and the heavily hundred who died there, and those who continue still to root out Kremlin's efforts to corrupt, coerce, and control. It's a dream for those Ukrainian patriots who fought for years against Russia's aggressions in the Donbass, and the heroes who've given everything, given their lives in the service of their beloved Ukraine. I was honored to visit their memorial in Kyiv yesterday to pay tribute to the sacrifice of those who lost their lives, standing alongside President Zelensky. The United States and our partners stand with Ukraine's teachers, its hospital staff, its emergency responders, The workers in cities across Ukraine are fighting to keep the power on in the face of Russia's cruel bombardment. We stand with the millions of refugees of this war who found a welcome in Europe and the United States, particularly here in Poland. Ordinary people all across Europe did whatever they could to help and continue to do so. Polish businesses, civil society, cultural leaders, including the First Lady of Poland, who is here tonight, have led with the heart and determination, showcasing all that's good about the human spirit. Madam First Lady, we love you. Thank you all. I'll never forget last year visiting with refugees from Ukraine who had just arrived in Warsaw, seeing their faces, exhausted and afraid, holding their children so close, worrying they might never see their fathers, their husbands, their brothers, their sisters again. In that darkest moment of their lives, you, the people of Poland, offered them safety and light. You embraced them. You literally embraced them. I watched the looks on their faces. Meanwhile, together we made sure that Russia is paying the price for its abuses. We continue to maintain the largest sanction regime ever imposed in any country in history. And we're going to announce more sanctions this week together with our partners. We'll hold accountable those who are responsible for this war, and we'll seek justice for the war crimes and crimes against humanity continuing to be committed by the Russians. You know, there's much for us to be proud of over all that we have achieved together this past year. But we have to be honest and clear-eyed as we look at the year ahead. The defense of freedom is not the work of a day or of a year. It's always difficult. It's always important. As Ukraine continues to defend itself against the Russian onslaught and launch counteroffensive of its own, there will continue to be hard and very bitter days, victories and tragedies. But Ukraine is steel for the fight ahead. And the United States, together with our allies and partners, are going to continue to have Ukraine's back as it defends itself. Next year, I will host every member of NATO for our 2024 summit in the United States. Together, we'll celebrate the 75th anniversary of the strongest defensive alliance in the history of the world, NATO. And let there be no doubt, the commitment of the United States to our NATO alliance on Article 5 is rock solid. And every member of NATO knows it, and Russia knows it as well. An attack against one is an attack against all. It's a sacred oath. Sacred oath to defend every inch of NATO territory. Over the past year, the United States has come together with our allies and partners in an extraordinary coalition to stand against Russian aggression. But the work in front of us is not just what we're against. It's about what we're for. What kind of world do we want to build? We need to take the strength and capacity of this coalition and apply it to lifting up the lives of people everywhere, improving health, growing prosperity, preserving the planet, building peace and security, treating everyone with dignity and respect. That's our responsibility. The democracies of the world have to deliver it for our people. As we gather tonight, the world, in my view, is at an inflection point. The decisions we make over the next 5 years or so are going to determine and shape our lives for decades to come. That's true for Americans. It's true for the people of the world. And while decisions are ours to make now, the principles and the stakes are eternal. The choice between chaos and stability, between building and destroying, between hope and fear, between democracy that lifts up the human spirit and the brutal hand of the dictator who crushes it, between nothing less than limitation and possibilities. The kind of possibilities that come when people who live not in captivity but in freedom. 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 There is no sweeter word than freedom. There is no nobler goal than freedom. There's no higher aspiration than freedom. Americans know that, and you know it. And all that we do now must be done so our children and grandchildren will know it as well. Freedom. The enemy of the tyrant and the hope of the brave and the truth of the ages. Freedom. Stand with us. We will stand with you. Let us move forward with faith and conviction and with an abiding commitment to be allies, not of darkness but of light, not of oppression but of liberation, not of captivity but yes, of freedom. May God bless you all. May God protect our troops. And may God bless the heroes of Ukraine and all those who defend freedom around the world. Thank you, Poland. Thank you, thank you, thank you for what you're doing. God bless you all.
Right now on Andrea Mitchell Reports, President Biden's keynote speech in Poland, reaffirming America and NATO's ironclad support for Ukraine, pushing back against Vladimir Putin, framing the war as a life and death battle for democracy and freedom over autocracy and aggression.
But there should be no doubt, our support for Ukraine will not...
Let's go to this channel real quick.
Response of Ukraine in the face of this aggression, but also because it really hammered on this theme of freedom. And it is very interesting when you talk to Ukrainians, they are very passionate about freedom. I have asked them many times where that passion comes from. One woman told me she thinks it's because they're an agrarian society, so they are very kind of devoted to this idea of their land and what that means to protect and defend their land. But a lot of the rhetoric that we heard from
I want to back that up real quick. I want to hear what she said. Agrarian society. I don't think I've ever heard it quite put that way. Let's
but also because it really hammered on this theme of freedom. And it is very interesting when you talk to Ukrainians, they are very passionate about freedom. I have asked them many times where that passion comes from. One woman told me she thinks it's because they're an agrarian society. So that passion comes from. One woman told me she thinks it's because they're an agrarian society, so they are very... one woman told me she thinks it's because they're an agrarian society, so they are very kind of devoted to this...
Agrarian society. It's the first time I've heard it worded that way, pertaining to that particular heading. I personally believe that the agrarian society that she's talking about began during the existences whenever God spoke to one of his great liberators, which was Moses, over in and around Egypt, towards letting my people go. Letting my people go. It's in the book of Ezekiel, whenever Moses was allotted by God of doing a certain particular task for God because of the aggressiveness and the inhumane treatment that was being conducted by the pharaohs at that time, that I truly believe that that is where this agrarian society began, in people having the fairness and the fullness to be able to rightfully determine their own futures, of whether or not they wanted to be led by a bunch of Otarian diplomats that wanted to basically treat them like a herd of cows or like slaves, versus a group of people that wanted to think for themselves and do for themselves, and wanted to basically choose, pick, and make decisions for themselves towards what people that they wanted to rule over them versus what people that they didn't want to rule over them, towards either voting them in office or out of office. Now, supposedly, the system that the Western world is familiar with here towards being able to do that, as well as other countries all over the world, began over in Greece, over in I guess around England area, pertaining to how that they formed. I guess it was before they formed parliaments that they formed colonies, and in the formalization of doing that, they delegated people through the taxation of King Herod, of being able to form institutions that would be able to oversee and overlook various commitments that either the government had made or the people had made for the government, that in both unisons that these formalizations by the Homo sapien humans would in fact work in a unified, harmonious, balanced type way. Even Jesus himself said, "Render unto Caesar the things that be of Caesar's, and render unto God to be of God's." So it was recognized in the heavenly kingdom towards how that the world was supposed to be run, in the fairness for not only the dictators or the politicians, whichever category that you want to put them in, also in the form of the way that the citizens was to reside in that particular government or governments. It had already been looked at, analyzed, deciphered, and yes, even chosen by the heavenly host towards what that even God himself expected out of humanity. And whenever humanity was no longer functioning that way, that's whenever God was going to send forth prophets and teachers and preachers and messengers and etc. to tell them the consequences involved if you did not conduct yourselves in this type of way, that you could expect these type of consequences. It basically relates back to whenever God had to destroy the old world with the flood, and that he made a promise that he would never ever destroy the world again by a flood, but the next time that he done it, that he would do it with fire and brimstone. Up until then, it has been a struggle for humanity not to make the same mistakes as they did, towards suffering the same fate and consequences that they did, that God give us a choice towards, if you live obedient and do according to his will, you will be blessed. But if you do not live that way, instead of you being blessed, he will pull the blessings from you, which will basically enhance a curse towards basically letting the devil have his way upon to the citizens, upon to the planet.
To this idea of their land and what.
Let's listen to this one more time. That way you get a better basis of what I'm talking about.
Ukrainians, they are very passionate about freedom. I have asked them many times where that passion comes from. One woman told me she thinks it's because they're an agrarian society, so they are very kind of devoted to this idea of their land and what that means to protect and defend their land. But a lot of the rhetoric that we heard from President Biden tonight, which was some of the more powerful and soaring that we have heard in some time, I have no doubt will be very well received by people on the ground here in Ukraine who do feel incredibly grateful for the support of the international community. And that's something that you hear again and again when you walk around. People say, thank you to the U.S., thank you to NATO, thank you to all those who are supporting us in these very difficult times. And you heard it again from the president as well on that front. We have to be clear-eyed about the future, he said. It's going to be tough. This isn't going to be ending in a matter of weeks or probably even months. Stealing people's expectations for, the inevitable heartaches and devastating battles that will be to come, likely.
Yeah, and talking about how fundamental the next 5 years are and all of that. Fred Pleitgen, you're in Moscow. I know earlier today that a Russian official was saying that Putin was not going to watch this speech, that he would be told later what the major themes were. But what do you think Kremlin officials made of what that forceful response that we just heard from President Biden?
Hi, Caitlin. Well, certainly the Kremlin did say that officials there are very closely going to watch the speech that President Biden has just given. And certainly, I think in many ways, they will think that it's a rebuff of what Vladimir Putin said earlier today, especially Vladimir Putin, earlier today laying out the fact that from his perspective, he believed that Russia didn't have any sort of other choice, that somehow Ukraine had essentially been hijacked by a neo-Nazi gang, as he called the Ukrainian government. I think one of the things that Vladimir Putin said in his speech today is he said that the current people who are in power, the regime, as he called it, was alien to the Ukrainian people. Obviously, it seems as though the facts on the ground seem to paint a different picture, because obviously Russia would probably be doing a lot better on the battlefield if in fact that were the case. But it certainly does seem as though a lot of Ukrainians are coming out and defending their country. And I think one of the things that Clarissa was just saying is absolutely key. President Biden going out and saying the Russian people are not the enemy of the United States and its allies in all of it, saying that essentially he believes that Vladimir Putin could end this war immediately. One of the things that we have to point out, Caitlin, which I think is really important, is that Russian state TV, Russian media, but also Russian officials have essentially tried to paint President Biden going to Ukraine as nothing more than a charade, saying they were putting on a show. This has no bearing to the real life of Ukrainians. Certainly, President Biden now saying that is absolutely not the case, that he obviously felt the pulse of the Ukrainian nation and certainly sees that there are a lot of people there who are fighting against the Russians, trying to take over their country. So in many ways, this was a really important speech, I think, also for the Russians to hear, for the Ukrainians to certainly hear, and definitely one that in many ways was a very strong rebuff of a lot of things that Vladimir Putin said today. Now, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that Vladimir Putin's ratings are rock solid. He certainly showed no signs of backing down, but it certainly seemed here that President Biden also showed no sign of backing down as well.
Yeah, he was essentially gushing about Poland there, telling the Polish First Lady that he loved her, talking about all that they've done. And Christiane, I want to get a final thought from you on that, because you're going to be speaking with President Duda soon, and we've already seen President Biden and President Duda speaking. But one important part that I thought Biden talked about was burden sharing, essentially what you've heard from some lawmakers back in the U.S. about how much support the U.S. is sending to Ukraine. But there's also the refugee aspect of this, and Europe has been shielding most of that, and no country more so than Poland itself.
Exactly, Caitlin. As the president said, more than 1 million, perhaps 1.5 million, and they've not gone to refugee camps. They're not in tents. They are in people's homes. And as he said, people embraced these refugees because they knew that they were neighbors and partners in what Poland had been defending all these years before it became now Ukraine's turn. And that is the fight for freedom and independence. I've been to many, many invaded countries, and in every one of those countries, no matter who the invader is, the people just fight back. Everyone defends their land. Everyone defends their territory. Everyone defends their flag when push comes to shove. And I think that's what you're seeing in Ukraine for sure. The Poles understand that. They're in this fight. President Biden gave this dramatic speech about how they would not tire of this fight for democracy and freedom, also convincing not just his friends and allies in this region, not just telling Russia, but also the American people, and praising the American fight always throughout history to uphold these values. The key thing, Caitlin, is going to be the speed with which all these promised weapons and the ammunition gets to Ukraine, because the way to keep public support for this war is to get it done as quickly as they possibly can. And that is going to be the key over the next several months for sure.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And those are the key questions walking away from this speech as President Biden was leaving the stage. Major questions about that, but saying that America's support for Ukraine will not falter, saying, quote, all democracies are being tested. John King, and you're in Washington watching this speech as well, as you're hearing from President Biden saying there is that commitment that it does stand, that the United States is committed to supporting Ukraine.
certainly the President, Caitlin, with a show of resolve as we near the end of year one and suggesting the United States and its allies will not waver as we head into a very unpredictable year two. Caitlin Collins, live for us in Warsaw. Caitlin, thank you, and to our entire team. Well, let's get some important perspective now from two women who understand the challenges ahead better than most. The former Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Beth.
About the serious consequences of doing that. I find it difficult to believe that she really wants to get into the middle of this. China has usually been concerned about China first, and for them to engage in providing arms and getting in the middle of this war between NATO and the United States and Ukraine against Russia only will weaken China. It'll only weaken China. So I would think that despite the threats and the tough talk, she has got to be thinking long and hard about the consequences that China will face if they, in fact, engage in providing weapons to Russia. It would be a pivotal step for China as well to suddenly get in the middle of this.
Wang Yi, the top diplomat, is in Moscow today, and there's a report in the Wall Street Journal, which we have not confirmed, that President Xi is going to make a trip to Moscow. So it just depends on whether the trip is accompanied by weapons. That would be the game changer. Let me ask you about President Zelensky's appeal for fighter jets, arguing that the F-16s, of course, the White House is arguing that the F-16s are too complicated, it takes too much pilot training, certainly would not be in place for this current offensive by Russia, which is misnamed the Spring Offensive. It's already underway. But do you think that those fighter jets should be supplied, or as Zelensky's arguing, or is the administration correct?
I think we're at a stage where, frankly, everything should be on the table and being considered. I mean, I recognize the issue of training, the issue of maintenance, et cetera. And all of that has to be taken into consideration. But, we're in it for the long haul. And at this moment in time, it is very important that Ukraine maintain the initiative in this war. Russia's losing. Even though they're trying to put on an offensive, they're not gaining ground. And it's clear that Ukraine has the momentum. We've got to maintain that momentum. We've got to give them whatever they need in order to continue to win this war. And so I'd put everything on the table. I would look at what are the most important weapons they need at this point in time and make sure that we're providing those weapons. But I would consider everything that could help Ukraine be able to defend itself. And for that reason, and I get this, frankly, from the administration itself, that, even though they may raise concerns, that the reality is that they are considering whatever may be necessary to try to help Ukraine in this war.
How important is it, do you think, that Zelensky not push too hard into Crimea? Would that be a trigger against something horrendous from Vladimir Putin?
I think right now the most important thing is for Ukraine to be able to stop any Russian offensive and go on the initiative, be able to start pushing Russia back in the Donbass and push them out of the territories they gained as a result of this invasion. I think that ought to be the primary focus. Obviously, they continue to believe that Crimea is part of the Ukraine, and it is, and Russia obtained it illegally. But I think right now the main focus ought to be on pushing the Russians back, gaining the initiative, and making clear that Russia is not going to succeed. The most important thing to maintaining the unity of the United States and NATO and Ukraine is Ukraine showing that it's winning this war. That is what will hold everybody together in trying to make clear that Putin will not succeed. And that needs to be the focus of our military effort there.
Leon Panetta, As always, thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Good to be with you.
Okay. This has been a moving moment going into the year anniversary about this relentless, unjustifiable war that that the oligarchs over in Russia has bestowed up into. And in doing so, like our chief and commander just said, it has demonstrated courage, it has demonstrated commitment, it has demonstrated a strong balance of humanitarian purposes that has been obviously given by various countries around Russia and Ukraine. But most importantly, it has opened the eyes of so many people all over the world towards how do we want to live not only our lives, but how do we want to see our children and their children and their children's children live out their lives. I want to say something to my viewers in response towards the things that you just got through listening to pertaining to the American chief and commander, President of the United States, saying some of the things that he recently said in conjunction to the war over in Ukraine. I know what I'm fixing to say is probably not going to be admired or appreciated, especially those locally in this area where I live. But in doing so, I believe that it's more important to speak truth to power than it is for the corrupt power to continue to lead us down this endless path that has led us into where we are today, not only here as Americans, but basically the world in general. Yesterday, I had to go making a doctor's appointment over in New Bern, Tennessee. My doctor is Dr. Belinda Presley. I had to change my original diabetic doctor from down at Dyersburg, Tennessee, Dr. Baba, because Dr. Baba did not take the services any longer in rendering to the WillCare Association in regards towards disability patients. But Miss Belinda Presley did, and because of it, she has helped me out, and she's changed some of my medications, etc. But while I was over in the New Bern area yesterday, I went ahead and went down to the individual that helped me make the memorial site pertaining to the military and the innocent victims that has been relentlessly shot illegitimately way before George Floyd. But my brother and I had already discussed these things of what we was going to do on this property, even though the majority of the people in this area, I'm not going to mention no names, but a great deal of them didn't appreciate or didn't want it to occur at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 3255, which that's fine too. But I went to this woman down in Dyersburg. Her name is Sumitra. Well, let me just show it right there, her card, down in Dyersburg, Tennessee. And I expressed to her 2095 St. John Avenue, Dyersburg, Tennessee 38024. I expressed to her that since she made that plaque for me to go on that memorial site, which was shortly after George Floyd's death, that since then there has been a tremendous amount of other mass shootings that I felt led of God to have to add to the display out here, because to me one life is just as valuable and as important as another life. It don't matter if it was conducted in one state or the other pertaining to the disease and the pandemic that the American people are suffering through right now, that I was going to add to the plaque. And she basically looked at it and she said, okay, it's going to, cost somewhere around in this price, this neighborhood. So I thought, all right, she just wants me to come back and get some better detail pertaining to the measurements and stuff. But as I was listening to this, I knew that it was going to be displayed this morning pertaining to on national TV with what's going on over there in Poland right now. And I went ahead and I fine-tuned Arnold Schwarzenegger in what he had to say shortly after the war broke out of what had been going on in his area before he got the opportunity of coming to America and being an American citizen. And it all reflects back to true godliness and fairness in regards towards let my people go. And obviously this has been something that other societies, especially not only in that area, but also in your Asian areas, have been struggling with for quite some times, because they wanted to still rule their people similar towards how the Pharaohs wanted to rule the children of Israel during Moses' era. And God is totally against that. But at the same time, I, as a spectator, can look and see where certain people really and truly does not have the decency about them to be able to rule their lives in a decent type way. And because of it, it can actually lean towards a destruction society, worser by giving them too much freedom than it would be if they didn't have no freedom at all. So I can see both sides of the coin here. But by and large, what did God intend? We got to go back to the good book. We got to go back to the book of life. God intended for us to be free moral agents, and that if we did have a belief or a religion, that it was to be based upon the righteousness and the holiness of God and not the unrighteousness of God. This is where society over here in America has taken such an abrupt turn since basically 1986 was whenever Congress made it legal for a cult type demon possessed worshiping satanic activity to be tax exempt over here in America. And since 1986 we have seen this grow, and we have seen this expand to the degree that now the contamination is falling upon to not just those that don't care, but also to those that do. And it hasn't been in just within the past couple of weeks I've seen where some Tennessee senator, God bless his soul, I don't know who it was, it may have been the governor involved in it, towards trying to put some sort of mandates on these phone organizations that make these high-tech phones, putting some sort of a damper or some sort of a filtering system on these phones to where it's basically impossible, no matter how smart that little Johnny or little Sally may be, that once you hand them this device, that there'll be no way that they can go in and find unappropriate material to look at. That way it stagnates and it contaminates their way of thinking and their life. Just like that there's a big issue right now over teachers teaching our children stuff that we find to be unfair, ungodly, and inappropriate, especially those that do want to try to serve under a holy, righteous God, that a lot of parents has bucked up against the system in regards towards how that these teachers want to let me get the wording right, want to not just influence our children, but basically push their way of life off onto our children, and not actually giving our children the opportunities that we had towards being able to make that crucial choice and whether or not we wanted to be this way or that way. Just the other night, after church in Fulton, listening to a wonderful, wonderful message by the Kingdom people pertaining to various people's opinions, I went to Grand Rivers, Kentucky, and looked around and had the opportunity once more to go into one of their pillars of their community, and sitting down and talking to an individual that I've known since day one, that his lifestyle was not the type of lifestyle that, according to the book that I read and according to the book that I believe in, is not deemed appropriate. Though they come over from California, him and his lover, and they made such of a big splash in the town of Grand Rivers, Kentucky, and they, have been a substantial pillar in the community. I'm still concerned about this guy's soul, to the degree that I embarked upon to another conversation with him, even though I knew that it was basically him who stood in the way towards my goodwill towards doing humanitarian work after a major 2009 ice storm hit up in Kentucky. I knew that it was basically him that raised a red flag towards me coming back into that area, helping them people for about 5 days, working with Troy Newsom, that was at the time the chief of police, the chief of the fire department out there, in basically having me run off from not only Grand Rivers, but having me run completely out of Livingston County, Kentucky. He was basically following up on that, in which what some of the officials there in LBL had already started, because they had become very, very concerned about me coming to Land Between the Lakes and making myself too apparent towards people questioning my motives of why I was up there to begin with. And of course, in 2007, whenever I was trying to help the people, like I explained to this individual up in Grand Rivers, Kentucky, about 2 days ago, and I told him that I was trying to help the people, not hurt the people. And I explained to him my theories about the inner core of the earth being basically the same temperature as the sun, and how that we have drained the oil and stowed the minerals, the precious resources out of the ground, to the point that now the oil has thinned in the earth, and because of it, the heat is expanding. I explained to him about the volcanoes all over the earth, that 85% of them are under the oceans, and about different things going on, and he sat and listened to me. And then I explained to him about accountability issues, and me and him had about a 2-hour talk. I explained to him about accountability issues, and that one day I was going to find out what individual up in Kentucky was trying to ruin my life, and that I was going to make sure that I myself was going to follow or chase this individual to the very pits of hell, towards making sure that they got what they should have coming to them towards them trying to destroy an innocent person's life that was actually trying to help them. I noticed he got uneasy about that whenever I said that, and he spoke up and he said, "You're not supposed to have any type of vengeance in your heart against anybody if you're a true Christian," which opened the door up for another opinion coming from myself. And I said, the way that I understand the Bible is that we are supposed to have just as much love for our Heavenly Father, just as Christ taught whenever they asked him, what is the greatest commandment of all? And he spoke up, he said, to love thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy soul, indicating that the human being, the Homo sapiens here upon the planet, has three different entities, and that one entity is just as important as the other towards loving thy God with all three entities, and loving thy God in these entities to the extent of loving God with all, not part all, but all. And I explained to him, I said, we're supposed to have, I believe, as much love for our Heavenly Father as we do hate against sin. By that time, his lover had already come up because they was going to go to a gym and work out. And I could tell that I was being observed, or, under some sort of observation. Who knows? The conversation itself may have gotten documented, may have had hidden recorders or cameras out there, and which, if he did, that's fine too. But I explained to him that we're supposed to have the hate against the sin, not against the sinner, but against the sin, and what was the core of the sin, which obviously is Satan. I think everybody realizes that there's a good entity and a bad entity, and that this bad entity that created this rebellion, there had to have been a reason why that God and the heavenly kingdom had war up in heaven that kicked him out to begin with, that we are supposed to have the same opinion and the same motivation about sin as our Heavenly Father did. And of course, whenever I said that, he just come unwound basically, and just flew into me towards defending his side. Whenever I spoke up about something about people being perverted, and I said something about that porn here in America has basically become a pandemic, to the degree that now it's reeking down into the eyes and the ears and the hearts of our children. He spoke up and said, well, I'm not into porn. And I said, no, you're not into porn. I said, you don't want the fake stuff, you want the real deal, don't you? Kind of looked at me kind of funny, like he didn't understand what I was talking about, but I knew exactly what I was talking about towards the lifestyle that he had chosen, this lifestyle of basically being, instead of a heterosexual, a homosexual, in which I ain't never had a problem with people wanting to be that way in their activities of life. I really don't have no problem in couples that want to be, they swap couples. They go to like places. I didn't even know these places existed until 2005, whenever I went down to lower part of Mississippi working the Katrina damage in 2006, January 2006. I think they call them, they call them probably different things, but it's where a couple goes in with one couple and they leave with a completely different couple. They swap partners. If grown adults want to do that and act that way, That's our business. But whenever it starts being pushed upon into my life and to my children and the people that I love and the people that I'm concerned about pertaining to their lifestyles and their souls as well as my own, then it does become my business. Got off the phone a while ago talking to a military brat, or not a military brat, but somebody that was in the Vietnam War that I have grown interest of liking. I stayed in a jail cell in Hopkinsville, Kentucky for almost a year because of illegitimate charges that was placed upon my life. And one of the first things he started talking about was secrets, classified material. That how come the United States government works in all these different shadows and all these different entities of top secret classified happenings that they're not willing to share with the rest of their partners. Because by and large, it don't matter if you're partnering up with a partner, let's say you're going to cut hair, or you're partnering up with a partner towards going to do construction work, or you're partnering up with a partner towards going to build a factory and going to start producing multiple parts, etc. Ordinarily, one partner don't lie to the other partner. It's kind of like a marriage. And, you can be married and go to those swap meetings down in the South or wherever that they are, probably all over America now, towards going in and introducing yourself and basically swapping from one person to another. You can live a life to some degree and make it look normal, but ordinarily whenever you do that, you're opening up a portal to danger. And if you'll study the facts about most of those relationships, including gay and lesbian relationships, most of them end in hostility and violence. And we're not just talking about somebody being angry or mad at somebody. We're talking about somebody becoming brutal. And usually somebody winds up being hurt very, very badly, if not dead. Same way with couples swapping with one another. Usually those pyramid or three-way type relationships don't wind up very good at all. Because emotions set in, jealousy sets in, greed sets in, one other purpose or another sets in that's not a godly purpose, and the next thing you know, as the old saying goes, if you knock on the devil's door hard enough and long enough, eventually the Lord himself will allow for you to walk in. But he was telling me how unjust and how unfair that it was for the American government to have all these classified materials and secrets in them operating, unfortunately, in a deceitful type way towards not allowing for their citizens to know what was actually occurring. And I agree with that. And the reason why I agree with that is because the way that the Bible pronunciates itself in the kingdom of God towards a family, that even Jesus himself said that I do not call you servants, because a slave master does not allow or let his servants know what their motives are, or what their intent is, or what they're doing, or why they're doing it. But that Jesus called them friends. Jesus called them brothers and sisters in the Lord. And that's the reason why the Bible says that no things that shall be done in secret without them being revealed. And if all these politicians here in America, I'm just talking about America right now, if they think that what that they have been embarked up into for the past 30 some odd years, since basically 1989, whenever Ronald Reagan finally accomplished what he wanted to accomplish in his presidency after 8 years, that if these people think that their motives, their desires, and their illegitimacies are not going to be found out, They are so wrong. They're all going to be found out. And I realize that that's the reason why a great deal of people don't like me in this area, is because I am honest. I am putting my life out there pertaining to my feelings, who I am, what I believe in, what I've been through, etc. And I try to be as honest with others as I am myself. And I feel like that is essential whenever it comes to credibility, number one, honesty, number two, and accountability, number three. And one's just as important to me as the other. Because one day, whenever we stand in front of the great white throne judgment, in being judged for our works, regardless whether our works be deceitful, in an evil, demonic way, or our works be in a good form, towards wanting to glorify God and wanting to help humanity, that all those works are going to be revealed, just like what happened up in Kentucky during the time that they was coming after me, towards me not just being examined once, not just twice, but 3 different times. 3 occurrences within a 5-year period of how that those people up in Kentucky was trying to bury me. They were trying to ruin my life. They wanted to put me in a category towards being a monster, somebody that was out to harm and hurt them. And instead of me out to harm and hurt them, I was actually trying to help them. And of course, whenever I touched off on the fact that accountability issues was going to be demonstrated towards whoever it was up there that was trying to ruin my life, and whenever I told that individual that I was sitting talking to, like I said, he's a very wealthy person. And I'm honored of the fact that me and him has maintained some sort of relationship since I got to know him, since 1989. I mean, he talked about the times that I would come down there to Iron Kettle and go to eat, that I would look like something that just got through coming out of the woods, like a Jeremiah Johnson or a wild man. He said, sometimes I thought that you was angry because of the way that you presented yourself. I said, no. I said, I was up there with God, and I was talking to God. And whenever I'd come down to society, I had to break that fast towards no longer being with God, to the point that now I'm with God and man. I'm with the sinfulness of man again. And because I was spending so much time up there, people got sweaty palms about me. They got nervous about me. But it wasn't until I said about loving and hating, and I told his lover, because even he gave me a raised eyebrow whenever I said what I said about hate. I said, we are supposed to hate the very entity that created sin. We're not supposed to hate the sinner, but we are supposed to hate the sin. That's the reason why the Bible, in the first 4 chapters of Revelations, talks about how that God himself hates those that professes to be Jews and are not, and how that God hates those that partake in the deeds of the Nicolaitans, pertaining to the old Persian Empire type worshiping sinners that tried to hoodoo and bamboozle the people, that even the Roman Empire, through the Catholic Church, took on that same concept, especially, I think it was King Augusta maybe, that declared Jesus's ministry as it being authentic about 300 years after Christ come and was resurrected and went back to heaven. But ever since then, mankind has been using religion for their own purposes, either controlling them out of fear, or controlling them out of shame, or controlling them out of greed. That humanity has corrupted the very thing that was supposed to have been righteous and holy and fair and right. Even Martin Luther, that stemmed off away from the Roman Empire pertaining to the Catholic Church, that was exiled and basically threatened. His life was in danger, because once he got into, once more, all the secrets, kind of like the Catholic Church. Catholic Church got all these secrets. You're not supposed to have secrets if I'm your partner. If I'm your brother and sister in Christ, you're not supposed to be upholding or withholding information from me towards us belonging to the same organization. But Martin Luther seen through all that stuff, and he broke away from them, and it costed him literally almost his life. It did cost him his position that he played in the Roman Catholic Church at that time. But since then, there has been a stem off from what he done, and there's actually been a religion that has formed from that pertaining to the Lutheran Church, which I declare as being a good thing, because people can now look at the truth versus the stagnated truth, which is nothing more than a lie. That's the reason why that our law books says that we're not supposed to tell part of the truth, but whenever we promise in a court of law to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, that means in all aspects of that conversation, you're supposed to bring to the light. And if there's one part of that, just one part, that you're withholding, then you're not telling the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Now you're only telling part of the truth. And if you're telling part of the truth, you're basically not necessarily lying per se, but you're still not telling the whole truth. So in actuality, you are lying. Technically speaking, you are lying, because you're not telling the whole truth about the subject matter of whatever's going on in that particular matter. The couples, like I said, that want to live these exquisite lifestyles towards husband swappers and wife swappers, and wanting to look one way in the eyes of the general public, but another way they're living a completely different lifestyle. Maybe you're a teacher at school around in these areas. If they found out that you was a cross-dresser, you was a drag queen, and you was going down to Jackson, Tennessee, making extra money on the side, once the commissioner or whoever it was in charge of that school found out about it around here, they'd probably fire you. Of course, it'd be illegal. They'd probably have a lawsuit, and they'd probably try to do it in a very, very discreet way, but they would still make your life miserable if they thought that you was living a lifestyle that was not appealing or attractive in their ethnic rules. Out in California, New York, Chicago, other big cities, not only would they not care, but in some situations they'd actually embrace that. Wow, did you make any money this weekend? Oh yeah, I done real good. Made a couple $100. Really? Cool. You know? They'd embrace that. What I'm trying to say is this, pertaining to the year war that's coming up. And you can't really look at it as a celebration. If anything, it's a disgracefulness of what has happened. But it didn't just happen on that particular day whenever President Putin decided to do what he done towards attacking the Ukrainians. Whenever the president mentioned the 100 heavenly host, that was talking about 100 people that sacrificed their lives for the very things that today the very people over in Ukraine are sacrificing their lives for right now. It was also not just talking about those people that were sacrificing their lives now, but the people that have sacrificed their lives all over this planet for the very same causes, beginning with those that sacrificed their lives during the days that the great liberator, Moses, was chosen by God to let thy people go. This has been an ongoing movement, and in the existence of this movement, it has been an ongoing, persistent rebellion by one party or the other, through one generation or the other, towards once more Satan wanting to dominate his appearances above and beyond the Holy Eternal Father's appearances. Whenever I sat in a meeting Sunday, being invited, I sat and listened to so much wisdom and knowledge that was coming from like 50 different opinions all over, that basically was some of the most enriching, goading knowledge that anybody could even want to obtain, providing that you want to obtain it. Once more, not everybody wants the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. They only want certain parts of the truth. They want to only have certain details of certain things. It's kind of like people that want to cherry pick the Bible. We don't want to believe in the whole Bible. We only want to believe in sections of the Bible, or the part that we want to believe in, and the rest of it, we're just going to deny it or basically be in a rebellion towards not believing it. Well, that's fine if that's the way you want to live your life, but to be in the shadows of the whole truth, nothing but the truth, that means you don't pick and choose towards what you believe and what you don't believe. If you believe in part of the Bible, you're supposed to believe in all the Bible. The people that was talking Sunday was talking about preparing in regards towards that even Jesus himself said in trying to bring out advisories and warnings to the people that to pray that you was either acceptable to escape the things that was going to be falling upon to the planet, or to pray that you could endure the things that was going to be falling upon to the planet, from A to Z, from diseases to wars to being treated unfairly, to going through this, to going through that, people losing their jobs, people losing their health, etc. People living in third world countries, going through some of the most horriblest events that you could think of. I mean, there was another earthquake late yesterday evening, like a 6.3 over in the very area that got destroyed about 3 weeks ago, pertaining to Turkey and Syria. Horrifying, absolutely horrifying to think that these things are occurring. But it all goes back to we the people. What have we done? Or what didn't we do that has been a contributing fact towards where we are right now? Even my buddy that I spoke to this morning, the Vietnam buddy, he brought up the fact about the barbarians. And he talked about a tribal group of people that I haven't thought about in a long time, and I looked it up, pertaining to the Bohemians. After I read a while ago about the Bohemians, that's a different tribal group from the Mohegans. The Bohemians basically started over in Italy, France, over in that area of the Europeans that today are called hippies or gypsies. People that really don't want to have nothing. They don't want to be obligated to nothing. They don't want to be committed to nothing. And those that know about my life and knows about some of the things that I've talked about the contamination of the hippies that have come over here in America that has put us on this road of doom and gloom of where we are right now, that I didn't realize that there was already like 10,000 of them over here before the Civil War. Most of them was in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, but they was here. That seed of division, the seed of rebelliousness, the seed of them living the lives that they lived in the way that they wanted to live it. I knew about various tribes and various groups, but I didn't realize that one stemmed off to the other, that influenced the other, that put us where we are today. Getting back to the war, I do not agree with anybody fighting. I do not agree with that type of hostility, with that type of barbarianism, to the degree of killing and bringing forth bloodshed for whatever reason that you may think is justifiable. It is not justifiable in the eyes of the Lord, because God gave us a written instructions towards how that we were supposed to live our lives. And one of those in detail is thou shalt not kill. What the motives in behind Putin and his oligarchs over there is doing is the wrong motives in regards towards what they're doing and why they're doing it. And because of it, it's evil. Evil, according to the teachings of the Bible, says that God is going to eradicate. And it's not going to be super exceeded out of the sky in the way that a lot of people will teach you or tell you about. The way that evil gets eradicated is working through his people. And whenever we see this going on illegitimately with other people, the innocent, we're supposed to stand up for the weak. We're supposed to stand up for the innocent. That was the reason why that my brother and I was so concerned about 3 little children across the road over here that Donald Ridgway had as tenants over here, but that they was getting played into the same hand towards acting and behaving in such of a rootless, ungodly form that if they would have been by themselves as a couple, my brother and I, we would have turned our back to it. But because of the children that was being exposed to that, we felt obligated as good Samaritan citizens to do something about that, and we did. We made a telephone call, which was basically taboo in this particular area, towards calling the child abuse services, either in Nashville or Weakley County, and having it reported. Of course, we see what happened in my life. My brother, David Jeffrey Jackson, could not take all the entanglements that was happening in his life, the way that his friends, or his so-called friends, his peers, was coming up against him because he had allowed for me to come back here. And like my brother told me, he said, Dennis, you have just as much right to live on this property as I do. He said, me and you are brothers, and we went through hell together. And he said, come hell or high water, I'm going to choose you, blood, over water, before I'm ever going to choose water over blood. And he said, the only way that they're going to run me off, and I'm not going to run you off, is for me to be run off in a body bag. And that's exactly what these people around here initiated up into my brother's life, to the degree that the Weakley County courts sat idly by and let happen. Now, whenever I was talking to the individual that I was talking to Sunday afternoon in Grand Rivers, Kentucky, that's worth several $1 million, I think he told me, he said he had employees right now of about 525 employees, or 522 employees, something like that. But whenever I was talking to that individual about accountability issues, I wasn't just talking to him. I was talking to everybody. And if these churches around here that has blackballed me, that has basically treated me the same way that the Roman Catholic Empire treated Martin Luther, if they think that what that they have done is godly or fair or right, I got news for them. They're going to be held accountable, regardless whether it be gay, ray, stray, regardless whether you be a murderer, a drug dealer, a hippie, a yippie, which is a smart hippie, or you be a crooked politician or a judge, or you just be a low life, no good for nothing SOB out here that's got hooked on drugs and not willing to hit a snake, even though it was fixing to bite you. People that are wrong are wrong. And these people are going to be held accountable for their wrongs. I have tried to do the proper and right thing. I have said all along that what the Russian government has embarked upon their people, the same way as Arnold Schwarzenegger, that played in the movie Terminator and all them other movies, that what they're doing, they have deceived their people, and what they're doing is wrong. Especially whenever it comes to bringing bloodshed into a society of people that didn't deserve that. Especially the women and the children, and most of the men that wasn't embarked upon to military affairs. They will be held accountable to the fullest extent of God's law. But so will these people around here too as well, that has allowed for this to go on, fester, grow, contaminate to the degree that they wanted to shove the very messenger that had the message down in a hole somewhere and destroy his life, such as my own. While in the meantime, all this other stuff was going on. I've said all along that certain people around here that was doing what they was doing, which was many families, that was hunting my brother and I, terrorizing us on a day-to-day level, that all they was basically the trigger men or women, because some of them was women, wasn't all men, that took my brother down, tried to kill him on his own property with his own gun. But these people that was doing that and acting that way was nothing more than the trigger men of those that didn't have the nerve of doing it themselves, while they sat back and was entertained and got tickled and giggled and laughed about it, just like those attorneys and all those judges that get together and they talk about different things, but they're not willing to be held accountable under their own laws because they feel like that they're exempt from that, because of the system that's corrupt, the system that's broken, the very system that Donald Trump talked about wanting to drain the swamp. Whenever Donald Trump talked about draining the swamp, Donald Trump had no idea how deep and how corrupt and how malice that the swamp had really become. And to this day, even though I put out something like 5,000 videos, they know my address, they know where I live, and they refuse to acknowledge me as me being even a human being, much less a born-again Christian, towards all of us are supposed to be in the same partnership together. It's only been by the grace of God that I've been able to get and go through the things that I've went through, and me still have a right mind and still be able to walk and talk and make the videos that I make towards putting them out to the general public. I can only be held accountable for the things that God has placed up into my life, my heart, my mind, my body, for me to do. If those that get a hold of these messages chooses not to do the right thing, that doesn't mean that I haven't done the right thing, because I have. Alamo Baptist Church, right down the road here, less than 2 miles, where the majority of my people are buried. They've had 30-something years now to grab the bull by the horns and have chose not to. First Baptist Church in Cydonia, less than about 2.5, 3 miles from here. They've had the opportunity of doing the same thing. The Assembly of God, the Pentecostal, the Church of Christ, the First Baptist, Second Baptist, Southern Baptist, the Methodist, the Assembly of God, the Church of God, all these different churches in the Bible Belt area has had plenty of opportunity towards trying to make amends and burying the hatchet. They didn't want the hatchet buried. So as I sat and I watched things like the president just got through talking about, yes, as an anointed elder of God, I want to voice my opinion about what that I can interpret, not only out of the Russians, but at the same time out of the Americans pertaining to the Western world. And the things that the Russians are doing right now to the Ukrainians, a great deal of the people over here in America are going to be held just as responsible, if not more responsible for, because they did not do the proper and right thing beginning in 1988, when 9 tapes was sent to the White House, beginning with Homeland Security. Beginning with the people that was originally in those positions in the White House whenever all that occurred. This has festered. It has snowballed. It has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And now it's totally out of hand, to the degree that now we're seeing more suffering and more anguish that's here in America, but happening all over the planet. And if these people that I have been leaving these messages to and for, if they think for 1 second that they're not going to be held liable for all of this, they are living in a fantasy land that I don't even think the Philistines and the Pharisees was in that type of hypocrisy during the time that they was living and their deceitful moments in time. So by me saying all of that, I say this: may heaven help us all in these last days as we're getting closer and closer and closer to accountability issues. Because the Bible is very clear in what it talks about in the last days towards seeing great destruction that will fall upon humanity. But at the same time, it's very clear in identifying that in the last days that he would pour out his Spirit upon all flesh, and that the meek would inherit the earth, and that we would see God raise up a people in the last days such as humanity has never, ever seen or experienced. I want to thank you for your time. Good luck to all of us. I want to say God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless our endeavors. And whoever gets a hold of this message in honor of the sacrifices that the Ukrainian people has made, I want to say our prayers and our thoughts goes out to them each and every day. Thank you again. And shalom.